Welcome to the debate. If you look at the wrist of a billionaire today, you're going to see this massive paradox hiding right in plain sight.
Oh, you mean the $50,000 mechanical watch?
Exactly. And the really funny thing about that luxury watch is it actually loses seconds every single day.
Yeah, it's terrible at its actual job.
Right. Meanwhile, the smartphone sitting in their pocket, which costs a fraction of the price, is syncing perfectly to atomic clocks via GPS. So from a pure utility standpoint, the watch is a terrible tool.
It really is. It's a profound disconnect, isn't it?
It is. So why is it worth 100 or sometimes 1,000 times more than the phone?
Because we're looking at this undeniable, just massive gap between an object's actual usefulness and its social value. The engineering, the accuracy, all of that is entirely sidelined in favor of something else.
Exactly. And the question we are tackling today is how we actually explain that immense gap. Do we consume these incredibly expensive items to prove tangible underlying wealth?
Or conversely, has our consumption detached from physical reality entirely? Has it just become this self-contained language of signs?
Right, and to explore this, we are tracing a 70-year conceptual leap in consumer theory today.
We are, yeah.
We'll start with Thorstein Veblen's foundational writings from 1899, and then we will contrast them with Jean Baudrillard's texts from the late 1960s and 70s. I'll be taking the position that consumption is, at its absolute core, a verifiable proof of actual economic reality and status.
And I will be taking the opposing view. I'm going to argue that modern consumption has evolved into a closed game of signs. It's completely detached from real wealth and operates as a system where an object's meaning relies solely on its differences from other objects.
Let's lay the groundwork with Thorstein Veblen. So when Veblen published The Theory of the Leisure Class in 1899, he was looking around at the explosive raw wealth of the Gilded Age.
A lot of new money floating around back then.
Exactly, a ton of it. And he was asking a really fundamental question. Why do people feel this burning need to show off their money?
Right.
And his answer gave us two concepts that have essentially defined sociology ever since: conspicuous consumption and conspicuous leisure.
So conspicuous consumption being, the act of buying things not because you actually need them, but just to prove you can afford them.
Precisely, and conspicuous leisure is the act of not working, specifically to publicly prove that you don't have to work. But here's Veblen's most brilliant insight.
Okay, lay it on me.
Both of these behaviors are united by a single, rather ruthless logic, the logic of waste. Because only the truly wealthy can afford to just throw away money, time, and resources, the waste itself becomes the ultimate, undeniable proof of wealth.
So the inefficiency is actually the point.
Yes! You buy the $50,000 mechanical watch precisely because it is a completely inefficient use of capital. It's the ultimate flex.
It's basically burning money to stay warm, socially speaking.
Totally. To put it in a modern context, think about those designer sneakers, like the Balenciaga shoes that retail for over $1,000 but come pre-destroyed.
Oh, right, the ones that look like they survived a lawnmower?
Yeah, they are scuffed, dirty, and falling apart right out of the box. Why is that the ultimate status symbol? Because paying a premium to intentionally look impoverished is the highest possible form of waste. You are literally burning money on dirt.
Right.
Veblen also introduces pecuniary emulation, which is essentially the treadmill we are all on. Every social layer mimics the consumption patterns of the layer directly above it.
The middle class copies the upper middle class, and so on, creating this endless, exhausting race.
Yes, but here is my core stance, and this is why I think Veblen's framework remains vital today. In this race, the sign always points to something real.
Okay.
The expensive object is a receipt. Whether it's a Gilded Age mansion or pre-scuffed luxury sneakers, it is undeniable proof of actual economic power. The waste proves the wealth.
I mean, I get the appeal of that framework. It's clean, it makes sense, but you're ignoring a massive shift in how society operates today.
How so?
Well, Veblen was analyzing a world that frankly no longer exists. Jean Baudrillard completely shatters this assumption in his 1968 book, The System of Objects. Baudrillard points out that an object actually possesses three distinct values.
Okay, what are they?
There is the use value, which is what the object actually does. So telling time, for instance. There is the exchange value, which is its price. But most importantly, there is the sign value, which is its social meaning.
Right, the status it confers.
Exactly. And Baudrillard's revolutionary claim is that modern consumption isn't driven by utility or even just showing off raw wealth anymore. It is driven entirely by this third value, the sign value.
Okay, but how exactly does he divorce that sign value from the actual exchange value? I mean, from the literal price tag?
Through a linguistic analogy, which I think is just brilliantly executed. Baudrillard argues that objects form a system of meaning exactly like words in a language.
Like a vocabulary?
Yes, exactly. Think about how a word works. A word only has meaning because it is different from other words. The word cat only means something to us because it is not bat or hat or car.
Sure.
Objects function the exact same way. A luxury car brand doesn't mean something in a vacuum, and it doesn't just mean I have money. It means something specific because it is different from a mid-range car or a budget car or even a different luxury car.
A Mercedes signifies something entirely different than a Ferrari, even if they cost the exact same amount.
Because they are occupying different spaces in the vocabulary of cars. Exactly. And my core stance is that this represents a crucial break from Veblen. The sign no longer points to real wealth. The sign only points to other signs.
Only points to other signs? Okay, give me an example.
Think about digital assets today, like video game skins or certain NFTs. People pay thousands of dollars for a JPEG of an ape or a digital jacket for a video game character.
Oh, right, the digital fashion friend.
Yeah, there is zero physical use value there. And the waste doesn't prove physical resources. It proves you understand the digital social code. We don't consume to satisfy physical needs or to prove a bank balance anymore.
We don't?
No, we consume to speak a language of differences. We're signaling who we are and where we belong within this massive matrix of science.
Well, I hear you on the linguistic analogy, and the NFT example is fascinating, I'll give you that. But let me give you a different perspective.
Go for it.
Go for it. If we look closely at the origin of our motivations and our aesthetic judgments, we still find Veblen's concept of invidious comparison.
Which is comparing ourselves to others to gain value, right?
Right, to assert dominance. Veblen points out something incredible about aesthetics. Our very taste is shaped by money. Let's go back to the watch. Why do we intuitively prefer a handmade, artisan-crafted mechanical watch over a flawlessly machine-made digital watch?
Well, under Baudrillard's framework, we prefer it because handmade is just a signifier of exclusivity. It's a word in the vocabulary that separates you from the mass-produced signifiers of the lower classes.
That's one way to look at it, sure. But I have a hard time buying that it's just a word game. When someone buys that handcrafted item, aren't they explicitly tethering their purchase to the real physical labor and resources required to make it?
Not necessarily.
But look, the machine-made object is cheap because it uses a fraction of human time. The handmade object is incredibly expensive because it consumes massive amounts of highly skilled, specialized human hours. The purchaser is proving their dominance over tangible resources.
By paying for the labor.
Exactly. They are effectively saying, I have the power to command a master craftsman in Switzerland to spend 1,000 hours solely on my watch. That is a brutal assertion of dominance over physical reality.
I see what you're saying, but
Even if our aesthetic preference feels natural to us, like, oh, this watch just looks more beautiful with its tiny gears, Veblen argues that underneath that aesthetic judgment is a subconscious appreciation of the cost. The beauty we see is literally the money spent.
I'm sorry, but I just can't agree with that, and let me tell you why. Your argument assumes that the human subject exists outside of the consumer system.
What do you mean by outside the system?
You're picturing a consumer standing on a mountain, looking down at a menu of objects, and consciously or even subconsciously calculating the labor time to prove their dominance.
Well, yes, I am.
But in his 1970 work, The Consumer Society, Baudrillard completely dismantles this idea of the sovereign consumer. Needs and the comparisons we make to satisfy them, they aren't natural human drives that precede consumption anymore. The system produces the need right alongside the object.
Wait, hold on. Are you suggesting we have no agency? That the desire for the handmade watch is just what? Programmed into us by the market?
I am saying that we cannot step outside the language we speak. You don't invent English to express yourself, right?
Right.
You are born into English, and it dictates how you can express yourself. Consumers are entirely embedded in a system of signs. When the modern consumer buys that handmade watch, they aren't actually asserting dominance over a craftsman's time.
They aren't?
No. Think about how industrialized the luxury sector actually is today. In many cases, massive conglomerates are heavily industrializing the production of these watches, but they meticulously design the appearance of the handmade just to satisfy the sign value of authenticity.
The appearance of the handmade?
Yes. Authenticity itself has become just another sign. The system realized that mass production created a deficit of uniqueness, so it just manufactured the artisanal as a brand new category of signs to sell.
So it's fake labor?
Exactly. When you buy that watch, you aren't buying a craftsman's real labor. You're buying what Baudrillard might call the semiotic ghost of labor. It's the idea of labor packaged and sold as a signifier.
Okay, I get the concept of a semiotic ghost, but I'm just not convinced by that line of reasoning.
Why not?
Because it completely ignores the fundamental economic barrier to entry. You can manufacture the semiotic ghost of labor all you want. You can dress up a factory-made watch to look like a cobbled-together artisan piece. But if the watch costs $50,000, the consumer still must possess $50,000 real dollars to acquire it.
Sure, but the money is just the entry fee to the game.
But it's a real fee. The sign cannot float entirely free of reality as long as price acts as a gravitational pull. The system of signs Baudrillard describes is just the superstructure. The base is still hard capital.
I think you're overestimating the reality of that capital.
Just think about debt. If a person goes into massive credit card debt to buy that luxury watch, they are engaging with deeply real economic forces. The interest rates are real, the labor required to pay off the debt is real, the threat of bankruptcy is real. The consequence of the purchase is fiercely physical.
The consequences are physical, yes, but the motivation, the reason they are willing to risk that very real bankruptcy, is entirely semiotic. They aren't going into debt for the steel and glass of the watch.
They kind of are, though.
No, they are going into debt for the social code it unlocks. And this actually brings us to a really critical point of contention between these two theories.
Which is?
The function of design in the consumer system. Let's pressure test this. If we follow Veblen's logic, what is the actual job of the product designer?
Under Veblen, the designer's job is fundamentally about visibility.
Visibility, okay.
The designer takes the invisible reality of wealth, the abstract numbers sitting in a bank account, and translates them into a physical form that society can immediately recognize on the street.
So basically, decorating the money.
Precisely. Design is the art of decoration, and it's the articulation of waste. The designer selects platinum over steel, not because it tells time better, but because it is heavier, much rarer, and far more expensive to mill.
Right.
The design must remain anchored to the real wealth behind it. If it doesn't, the object fails in its primary task of conspicuous consumption. The designer is essentially an engineer of status proof.
See, I come at it from a completely different angle. If we apply Baudrillard, we see that he shifts the entire purpose of design. Design does not exist to decorate pre-existing wealth. Design actually produces the difference itself.
Produces the difference? Let's unpack that. What do you mean by that?
If meaning is born entirely from difference, just like words in a language, then design's only job is to constantly, relentlessly produce new differences so the language can keep expanding.
Okay.
This perfectly explains the phenomenon of fashion and trends. Why does the lapel on a suit get wider for 5 years and then suddenly narrow? Why does the popular luxury watch style go from blue to green and then suddenly to salmon pink?
Well, under Veblen, you might say it's just new ways for new money to show off.
But under Baudrillard, it is an absolute requirement of a self-enclosed system that must constantly generate meaning. If the signs stop changing, the language dies.
Okay, let me make sure I'm following here. You are saying that planned obsolescence isn't just about making a washing machine break after 5 years so you have to buy a new one.
Right.
It is about making the meaning of the object break? Like when Apple changes the camera layout on the back of the new phone, it's not always about a better lens. It's so that last year's phone physically looks outdated?
Exactly. It's semiotic obsolescence. This system generates slightly distinct versions, constantly updated models, and endless limited editions.
And that's not just a cash grab.
Well, it is, but it's deeper than that. This isn't a coincidence, and it isn't merely a reflection of a newly minted tech billionaire wanting to show off. It is the lifeblood of a system that must produce difference to survive.
Huh.
The designer is not decorating reality. The designer is writing new vocabulary for a language that demands constant expansion. In this process, the actual utility of the object, whether the phone makes calls, whether the watch tells time, becomes a mere leftover. It's an afterthought. The watch still tells time, sure, but that is the absolute least interesting thing about it.
I see the elegance in that argument, I truly do. The idea of semiotic obsolescence perfectly describes the frenzy of modern product cycles, all the endless drops and limited editions.
It's exhausting, honestly.
It is. But let's ground this back in the material reality of the consumer. Even if the designer is just generating arbitrary differences, say salmon pink dials versus blue dials, the adoption of those differences by the upper classes is still an act of Veblen's pecuniary emulation.
How so?
Think about the life cycle of a trend. The elite adopt the salmon pink dial first at an exorbitant premium. The middle tier copies it a year later when a cheaper brand mimics the design.
Right.
The elite then must abandon the salmon pink dial for something else because it has lost its power as a proof of exclusivity. The game of signs you are describing is really just the mechanism by which Veblen's class warfare is waged.
You think it's just a new weapon for an old war?
Exactly. The vocabulary changes, sure, but the conversation is still fundamentally about power, resources, and who has the money to stay ahead of the curve.
I agree that emulation happens. We see it every day, but the nature of the power they are emulating has fundamentally changed. In 1899, power was possessing the factory that made the watch. Today, power is controlling the code that gives a watch its meaning. And I think the proliferation of high-quality counterfeits in our modern era proves Baudrillard's point beautifully.
The counterfeit market? Wait, how does that prove your point?
Think about a perfect replica of a luxury watch. It's made in the same region, using the exact same grade of steel, by a CNC machine with the exact same tolerances.
A superclone.
Right, a superclone. It possesses the exact same use value. Functionally, it is identical. Physically, it is identical. Yet, if the consumer knows it is fake, it holds zero sign value for them internally. Or worse, it holds negative sign value.
Because it's not real.
But what does real even mean? The entire multi-billion-dollar luxury industry is built on defending an invisible, legally constructed concept of authenticity. They aren't defending the metal. They are defending the sign. The physical reality of the object has been completely hollowed out.
That's a fascinating thought experiment, but I would actually argue it proves the exact opposite.
Really?
Yes. The fact that the luxury industry spends billions defending their trademarks, and the fact that consumers care so deeply about a watch being real, proves that the sign must remain tethered to its authorized economic origin to have any value.
I don't follow.
If it were truly just a floating game of signs, a perfect fake would be just as good as the real thing. It broadcasts the exact same aesthetic difference to the observer on the street, right? The person at the coffee shop sees the same salmon pink dial.
That's true, they do.
But it isn't just as good. The wearer knows it's fake. The wearer knows they didn't expend the actual capital required to acquire the genuine article. The anxiety of wearing a counterfeit, that deep fear of being found out by a watch enthusiast, is fundamentally the fear of being exposed as an economic fraud.
Ah, I see what you're going.
That anxiety proves Veblen is right. We still desperately demand that our signs are backed by the gold standard of real wealth.
But the gold standard of real wealth is itself a semiotic construction. We don't even use the gold standard in macroeconomics anymore.
Well, metaphorically speaking.
But literally, money itself is a fiat currency. It's a sign that points to other signs. It's data on a screen. The anxiety of the counterfeit wearer isn't about economic fraud. It's about a failure to properly integrate into the symbolic order.
So it's just social anxiety?
Yes, they feel anxiety because they are speaking the language with a false accent, and they are dreading the moment a native speaker notices the discrepancy. The very concept of real wealth today is inextricably bound up in the manipulation of signs, branding, market speculation, digital assets. There is no hard, tangible reality of wealth sitting at the bottom of the turtle stack anymore. It is signs all the way down.
I have a really hard time buying that because it risks turning all of human endeavor into a linguistic abstraction. Let's bring it back to the physical body.
Okay.
If a person cannot afford food because they spent their wages on a status symbol, their hunger is not a semiotic construct. An eviction notice is not a floating signifier.
Of course not.
The consequences of participating in the system are brutally physical. Therefore, the consumption that drives the system must be seen as an engagement with physical reality. It is an attempt to carve out a hierarchy of survival and comfort, even if it is cloaked in the highly sophisticated language of modern branding.
I don't deny the physical reality of hunger or eviction. Of course, those are real. But I argue that the consumer system is so pervasive that it has successfully subsumed even those brutal realities into its logic.
Subsumed starvation?
You just said it yourself. People will prioritize the sign over their own physical well-being. A person will eat instant ramen for a year to save up for the designer bags.
Right.
That doesn't prove that consumption is about physical reality. It proves that the semiotic drive, that desperate need to exist within the language of society, has actually overpowered the basic biological drive for good nutrition. The system of objects dictates the terms of our existence so thoroughly that utility and physical necessity are relegated to the background.
Which, ironically, actually brings us to a really fascinating point of convergence, despite our deep disagreements about the root cause here.
Convergence on utility?
Yeah, because beneath the complex language of modern brands, I still maintain that consumption remains a verifiable display of economic reality. It's a modern, hyper-accelerated evolution of Veblen's original logic of waste. The designer's role is to make that waste visible and socially legible to everyone else.
Right, and I maintain that a fundamental shift has occurred over the last century. We have moved entirely away from Veblen's world, where we consume to prove a reality, like status or wealth, and we have entered a self-contained game of signs, where that physical reality has been left far behind. The designer's role is to relentlessly produce the differences that keep this language alive.
Yet where we completely align, and what is so striking about looking at these theories side by side, is the profound realization that an object's actual usefulness has died.
It really has.
Its utility, its original reason for existing in the world, has been entirely sidelined in favor of what it communicates. The object is no longer a tool, it is a broadcast mechanism.
Absolutely. Whether it is broadcasting a bank balance, as you argue, or broadcasting a location in a semiotic web, as Baudrillard argues, the actual function of the object is the absolute least important thing about it.
It is.
It's remarkable to look back at the source material and see this trajectory mapped out so clearly. You go from the industrial tycoons of 1899 to the mass consumer society of the late 20th century and right into our current era of digital assets and hyperbranding.
There is so much more to explore in this material, especially regarding how design is transformed from a tool of necessity into a massive global engine of meaning. Looking at everyday objects through both of these lenses, through Veblen's waste and Baudrillard's signs, it kind of completely changes how you interact with the physical world.
It certainly makes walking through a high-end shopping district or even just scrolling through an online storefront a completely different experience. You stop seeing products, you start seeing arguments, claims of status, and these desperately evolving vocabularies.
Which brings us right back to where we started. The next time you see someone glance at their wrist, checking the time on a watch that costs as much as a luxury car, while holding a phone that tells time perfectly, ask yourself what they are really looking at.
Are they checking the time?
Exactly. Are they checking the time? Are they admiring the sheer audacious waste of capital required to engineer such a beautiful anachronism? Or are they simply reading a sign, reassuring themselves of their place in a language we are all forced to speak? Something to think about.
Indeed.
Thank you for joining us. We will see you next time.